One of my followers said that she accidentally matched with a vampire on a dating app. And before you laugh, wait until you hear what actually happened, and to her body the morning after the first date. And I'm going to call this woman Erin. She asked me not to use her real name, so that's what we're going to go by. And obviously, I cannot verify what actually happened to her. She doesn't even know what she even believes, but according to Erin, about a year ago, she matched with a man on a dating site who seemed completely normal at first. She actually said he was probably one of the most interesting men that she's ever spoken to. And they spent nearly an entire year talking before they actually met in person. And over those months, she noticed something about him that, he started to change a little bit. His conversations became a little darker, his personality became a little stranger. But weirdly enough, she found herself becoming more attracted to him because of it. And when they finally met face to face, Erin said something happened that she still doesn't completely understand. Because that night, she invited him home and he refused right off the bat. But somehow, hours later, Erin woke up believing that he'd been standing beside her bed all night long. And Erin said when they originally matched, there was absolutely nothing about this man that screamed vampire or anything. No like ridiculous gothic photographs, no fake fangs, no pictures of him drinking red wine in his cemetery at midnight. You know, no like Edwardian clothing, nothing. He was attractive, he was well dressed, intelligent, and unusually articulate, she said. And she said he called himself Adrian, but she thinks that it wasn't really his real name. And there was something almost old-fashioned about the way that he communicated, right? They didn't immediately exchange phone numbers right off the bat, and for the first few months, they mostly just emailed. Very long emails and very like in-depth and intense, not the usual dating app small talk. They discussed books, history, music, religion, death, philosophy, places they'd love to travel, places they did travel, things they wanted to experience before they died. And sometimes Adrian would send an email late at night, and Erin, of course, wouldn't see it till the next morning. Now, eventually, they switched to WhatsApp, and that's when she started noticing little things about him. Adrian was almost always available late at night. She could message him at midnight, 1 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and he would answer almost immediately within seconds. During the day, however, sometimes hours would pass and he wouldn't answer, and occasionally an entire day would go by and he wouldn't answer. Erin joked with him once and was like, do you ever sleep? And he would just jokingly reply and be like, oh, just not usually when, everyone else does. So she didn't think anything of it, and he told her he worked very strange hours, but as the months passed, their conversations gradually became a little darker. Not like disturbing, not threatening, just different. Adrian seemed fascinated by mortality, and he once asked Erin whether she thought immortality would be a gift or a punishment. And another night, they were talking and somehow they got onto the subject of memories. And Adrian, said something to Erin like that she actually saved because she thought it was so beautiful. And he basically said like, eventually you stop missing places, you start missing versions of the world that no longer exist anymore. And it's true. Now, Erin asked him what he meant by that, and Adrian just responded with saying something like, hopefully you'll never have to know what I mean. And that was the strange thing really about him, was he would occasionally say something that sounded almost impossible for someone his age to say from experience. He was only I think 22. But then, he'd immediately make a joke and the conversation would move on. Now, they admitted that instead of, she admitted that instead of frightening her, the mystery made him even more attractive. And after nearly a year of talking, they finally agreed to meet. Now, they chose a popular bar in Erin City. It was very public, very busy, and safe. Erin had arrived first, and she remembers being incredibly nervous because, after talking to someone for almost a year and you're finally meeting face to face, it kind of feels like surreal. It's like different from meeting a stranger. And then he walked in, and Erin said she immediately recognized him, and he looked exactly like his photographs and maybe even better in person. But there was one thing that the photographs hadn't captured, and it was his eyes. Erin couldn't explain what it was, but they were so unusual, and she was so attracted. And they weren't like glowing, they weren't red, nothing ridiculous like that. She just said maintaining eye contact with him felt unusually intense. Like when Adrian looked at you, you became extremely aware that he was looking directly at you. And he walked over, he smiled, he said her name, and he gave her a hug. And almost instantly, Erin's anxiety completely disappeared. Adrian was a complete gentleman. He pulled out her chair, he, listened when she spoke. And he remembered tiny details that she'd mentioned months earlier. And she really liked that. He never once behaved aggressive or inappropriately at all. Erin specifically wanted me to emphasize that because she doesn't want this story turned into something that it wasn't, right? She never felt unsafe or anything like that. It was actually quite the opposite, she said. And as the night progressed, Erin became increasingly comfortable with him. Almost too comfortable. Hours seemed to disappear, and I'm sure we've all been in that before. Now, she remembers looking at the clock at one point and being genuinely confused by how late it actually had become. She'd barely touched her phone, she stopped paying attention to everyone around her, and at some point, the crowded bars seemed to fade into background noise. There was only Adrian, his voice, his eyes, and her, and that's all that she knew. Eventually, the bar began thinning out, and they walked outside together. And before leaving, they gave each other a little kiss goodbye. Nothing dramatic, nothing aggressive, just a short little peck. Erin said that she nervously laughed afterwards, and she asked him, like, hey, do you want to come back to my place and hang out a little bit more? And at this point, this is when it becomes very important, because Adrian, he could have said yes, but she invited him. And instead, his expression completely changed, and he looked at her for several seconds, and he smiled, and he's like, oh, I probably shouldn't. And she's like, why? Okay. And he's like, I just don't think it's a good idea tonight. And then he gave her a kiss on the cheek, and before walking away, he said, but I wish you a great night. And that was it. He just walked away. Erin said that she watched him disappear down the sidewalk, and that was it. He just left, and that should have been the end of it. Now, sometime during the night, Erin started to dream, and she called it to call it a dream almost feels dishonest, basically. Because she said she's never experienced anything like that before. It was so vivid and so real. And she was lying in her actual bedroom. She was in the clothes that she went to bed in. Everything was like very real. And then Adrian stepped into view, and he wasn't monstrous or anything. He didn't frighten her. He just walked in very casually, and he looked exactly how he did at the bar that night. And she said he had a very calm expression, and he sat beside her, and she remembers trying to speak, but she couldn't talk. And I'm sure we've all had that experience in our dream before. You try to move, it feels like your feet are in peanut butter. But then he leaned toward the back of her upper arm, right around her tricep area, and she said she felt this intense burning pain when he did that. And she immediately woke up. She jumped up, and she was like, what the hell? And she was sweating, and she ran into the bathroom to try to, whatever, because it just felt so real, and the pain was still there, even though that she had woken up at this point. And she said when she looked in the mirror at the back of her tricep, she noticed what looked like bite marks. And she's like, there's no way that that's possible. But did it happen? She had this dream that he knelt down and bite the back of her arm. And here she is now, fully awake, woken up from the pain, and she has bite marks on the back of her arm. And I'm going to show you the picture. And again, there's no way for me to verify any of this, so take it as entertainment. But let me know what you guys think in the comments.